You're listening to the Risk Ready Roundup, the podcast that cuts through the noise and gets straight to what matters, protecting your home, your family, and everything else you've worked hard for. We bring you real stories from homeowners who fought battles and won. We'll also share hard-earned lessons from the experts, attorneys, public adjusters, and contractors. The people in the trenches who know how the game is played. If you own a home, a rental, or a portfolio, this is where you'll learn how to stay one step ahead of the storm, the fire, and yes, even your insurance company. No fluff, no shortcuts, just raw conversations, practical strategies, and the knowledge you need to make sure when disaster hits, you're not left standing on the curb empty-handed. This is the Risk Ready Roundup. Let's get into it. Well, welcome everyone to the Risk Ready Roundup. I'm your host, Jason Doyle, and today we've got a guest who knows the law inside and out. And more importantly, he knows the recent legislative changes in the insurance world and how they could affect you. Our guest today is Michael Giardina, and he's a partner at Godbey Giardina law firm. He's represented homeowners and business owners in some of the toughest insurance battles around the country. And with new legislating shaking up the insurance market, there's no better time to get his perspective. Michael, it's my honor to welcome you to the Risk Ready Roundup. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Jason, I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely, man. So listen, if you would, let's start by telling our audience just a little bit about your background, and then let's talk just a little bit about the Godbey Giardina firm and you know the stretch that you have across the country and you know how you guys have been able to help people as attorneys.
Yeah, absolutely. So Godbey Giardina, we're a law firm, national law firm, and we focus on property damage claims. You know, people that suffer damage from hurricanes, fires, tornadoes. But it all started, you know, a little bit of my background is I'm born and raised in South Louisiana, experienced hurricanes. You know, it kind of all started with Hurricane Katrina. We had 18 feet of water at our house, and you know, the day after I was helping with search and rescue missions. And that's kind of what got me started on really serving people in our community because we have such a great community. And from there, I went into law enforcement, did 13 years in law enforcement, and wound up going into law school. And lo and behold, Godbey Giardina Law Group came about. And we service clients in over 20 states, you know, doing...
That's awesome.
You know.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. You know, I've had the pleasure of working with you and referring clients to you, and you know, the firm is top notch and really gets results for the folks that we're done. So before we get into some of these details, you know, give our listeners a quick little snapshot of what's happening right now in Florida and Louisiana that our users really need to be concerned about. Let's start with Florida.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, it's really across the country. We're seeing a huge shift. Insurance companies are pushing new legislation, and you know, lobbyists in all these different states. In Florida, you know, they're shortening the time frames that people have to report a claim. It used to be 2 years, now it's 1 year that you have. And 1 year seems like a lot, but when you start getting into a claim, there's a lot of documents. There's, you know, that the insurance company really wants you to give. And so we're seeing the same thing in Louisiana, Mississippi, I mean, all over.
Yeah. And what about, you know, some of the laws as they relate to public adjusters and attorneys' fees and, you know, some things we've discussed previously on how they're affecting the actual execution and processing or litigating of a claim. How are those things changed?
Yeah, so they're changing what you call the bad faith laws. They're making it harder to recover attorneys' fees, even if you win at trial, depending on the state. They're giving insurance companies longer to adjust claims, which I'm not saying is necessarily a bad thing, but it's putting more pressure on the homeowner to be prepared and actually provide the insurance company, which they should always provide the insurance company with what they need, but it is actually putting it into law and putting a good faith duty on the homeowner.
Yeah. You know, if you kind of look at it from the frame of reference in the medical community, you know, someone in their 50s, 60s, 70s and not great health can't just assume that the doctor is going to fix everything that they have with a pill
Right.
or with a surgery. They have to take responsibility for their own health. And things aren't so different in property and casualty with insurance. I mean, a homeowner has to take some responsibility for preparation, number one, but then, you know, B, when they're in the middle of a claim, you know, understanding some of the different wheels that are in motion and how to get them all moving in the same direction.
Right.
So, tell me just a little bit about, maybe you could dial it down to maybe 3 or 4 things. Like, what are the most important things that you think a homeowner or a property owner needs to know in today's climate as they relate to insurance claims?
Yeah, and so, like I said earlier, we're seeing a lot of new legislation. So, like, for instance, in Louisiana, they are putting a good faith duty on the homeowner to provide estimates and documents, and that is basically the homeowner has to be more prepared in what they're going to provide to the insurance company. Know what your policy is covered. Make sure that you have all the documentation of what your property was prior to the loss, and really prove the case. I mean, in the
So, like, whereas it used to be the case where it was incumbent upon the insurance company to prove that something wasn't in a certain condition, now it's incumbent upon the homeowner to prove that it was in that certain condition prior to the loss. Is that right?
Yeah. No, I mean, the homeowner always has the burden of proof to prove the damage that related to it and related to the loss. And so, having those documents and being prepared. Look, I'm an Eagle Scout, so being prepared is probably the number one thing that I can tell homeowners to do, right? And that's why you see attorneys throughout the nation. I mean, we aren't the only attorneys that do this type of law. I mean, you see them, stressing, check your policy, make sure you take photos of your contents, make sure you have documentation of any, trailers or anything, and store that somewhere and take it with you when you evacuate.
Yeah, and Michael knows our Risk Ready mobile application has all those features built in to help our users do that, and also has a framework and a roadmap and a platform that they can follow leading up to a claim, and even when they're in the middle of a claim, so that they're not felt lost or abandoned, by themselves when they have to go this. Look, let's talk money for a minute. Tell us how these changes hit a homeowner's bottom line, because a homeowner thinks that a lot of times that they have sufficient coverage, or sometimes they think they may have coverage in a particular area that they then realize they don't have coverage. I've heard stories of some of these folks out in California where endorsements were kind of improperly stuck in when policies were renewed and fire got excluded from their coverage. So now here they are, their home gets burned up in a fire and they think they have coverage, but turns out they signed documentation that agreed that they don't have fire. And it really puts them in a precarious situation. So financially, how do some of these changes in legislation actually affect the bottom line for a homeowner or a business owner?
Yeah, look, knowing what's in your policy, I cannot stress that enough. I've unfortunately had to tell clients many times that they're not covered for something. Knowing whether your policy has a roof payment schedule. A lot of times people think just because their roof is damaged that they're going to get a full roof replacement. Well, the problem is you might have a high deductible, and then couple that with what's called a roof payment schedule where it's depreciated. You might get $1,000 for your full roof, and that's legitimately what the insurance company owes. Another scenario, which is there's some legislation right now in Louisiana that they're trying to push, is to add arbitration clause to a policy. And so, what I tell people is anytime you're going to get a lower premium, you need to ask yourself, is this going to help me when I have a claim, or is it going to help the insurance company? And so there's legislation to throw arbitration clauses into insurance policies here in Louisiana for a lower premium. Well, there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
It's harder to recover. And so really knowing what your policy covers is paramount.
Yeah.
Prior to a loss.
And look, for those of you that don't know, when you onboard the Risk Ready mobile app, there's a risk analyzer feature in there. You just upload your policy into it, and it goes through that and makes recommendations on, after you get a letter grade of a C- or a B- or what have you, it makes recommendations on, it's called gap analysis, on where you might not be covered, and helps you find the areas and the right coverages. So at the very least, you can go back and talk to your insurance provider and say, look, I thought my full roof was covered, or I thought I had, sewer backup coverage, and I don't, and how do we go back and look at getting those items added? Because incrementally, we have found that that while the insurance company may exclude a lot of those things through endorsements, to get them added back into the policy, oftentimes it's not very expensive. You just have to ask for them, and you have to know what you're asking for.
Right.
And people overlook it a lot of times. Look, tell our users, man. I mean, you've had to have handled thousands of claims. We were earlier. We were talking about a former client or a client with artwork or something. Just tell our users some crazy stories that are out there, because I know what happens a lot of times. People feel like they're the only ones. They feel like I'm the only one who's dealing with this with my insurance company. And the reality is that there's patterns and there's trends that show some companies are worse or better than others. But and look, man, you work for State Farm. One of the biggest ones that are out there. So. Tell us, just a couple of stories where you kind of your heart fell out for the homeowner by the way things worked out and how things could have been differently had they taken different steps.
Yeah, no, I mean, unfortunately, we get claims that have these weird exclusions in them. Look, there's so many stories that I could tell. There was a church one time where in depositions, the underwriter actually said when they set the policy up, they set it up to where they would never have to pay for the roof based on the deductible and the depreciation. So when they sold the policy, they knew that even if the roof was completely damaged, they would not have to pay for it. And so, there's some issues with that. We were able to recover the roof because you're selling a product that's not,
insurable.
Yeah.
And I presume that if it was the roof that caused the loss, or wind caused the loss, but the water came in from the roof, then they're going to try to get out of paying for anything that got damaged by the water coming in from the roof if the roof wasn't covered.
Right, and actually in that case, they tried to claim that a lot of the damage on the interiors were pre-existing.
Oh wow.
Well, unfortunately for them, the underwriting report proved otherwise, and that's why. Having a pre-loss report and showing that your property doesn't have any damage is very important, because that is one of the biggest tactics, is trying to prove that the actual damage caused is pre-existing.
Yeah, we see that a lot in like rotted wood. Like the insurance companies will say, look, we don't cover rotted wood. That was deferred maintenance that the homeowner should have been taking up over years. The reality is, had there not been a storm, the wood would not have gotten wet, and there would be no rotted wood there. It's interesting. Some of the stories we've heard over the years. I mean, we've heard stories of adjusters, sitting in their cars, saying they actually got up on the roof when they never did get up on the roof. And look, man, these insurance companies are overwhelmed when these storms come through.
Right.
They went from having 5 people on staff to 50 overnight. Most of those 45 are temporary employees that they got to staff up to. Those employees have a lot of responsibility, in dealing as desk adjusters or dealing as third-party adjusters in the field. And, a lot of times they got a lot of pressure to comply with, their deadlines that are required by the state to get the adjustments written as quickly as possible. And, who knows, man, sometimes they get called off, they get spread in different directions. And we've said many times it's a broken system. And, by being able to document and prepare accordingly, and in Risk Ready, those photos and videos that Michael was talking about, when you get a time-stamped geotag report that comes out when you do that. So it not only shows the date and the time that the photos were taken, but it geotags them. So there's no way the insurance company says, oh, no, you were at the house next door filming, not your house. No, this is
right.
My address, my house, and here's the geotag, the longitude and latitude coordinates that prove where I was. So critical aspects as we go forward. So look, Mike, before we wrap, I'd like for you to give us 3 takeaways. So if I'm a homeowner and I'm in Florida or Louisiana, what are 3 things that I should be doing today? I mean, here we are right in the middle of hurricane season. We're just a couple of days past the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. Pretty soon we'll be coming up on Hurricane Ian, and that anniversary, and there's a whole slew of them, because these storms come. Sometimes when they come later in the season, they're actually bigger, and they're higher categories and cause more destruction. So, for folks from Florida all the way down to Texas, that are bracing themselves that we have a smooth and no storm season, yet, we all know once that storm gets into the Gulf, now it's time to kick it in high gear. What advice would you have for them, Just give me three things for a homeowner or a business owner.
Yeah, absolutely. The number one thing is the policy, right? I mean, if you don't have coverage for something, there's no public adjuster, contractor, or attorney that is able to open coverage for you if you're not interested. So knowing your policy, knowing what's excluded, because they're adding a lot of exclusions, nowadays. So the policy, that's the number one thing. Got it. The second thing would be to document the condition of your property, have a list of all your contents. It's can be tedious. Other than now, there's an easier way, right? Yeah. But having that documentation is going to help with leaps and bounds going through the claim process.
Yeah, and we're not talking about having a notepad with a pencil written on it when you have. I mean, we're talking about photographs,
right?
Image timestamp photographs where we can come back and have something that's defensible against an insurance claim when we need it, right?
Right. No, absolutely. Look, I have clients whose houses are completely burned down, and the insurance company is asking for a contents list.
Yeah.
I mean, the contents were completely burned up, but you still have to show that you had the content. So having that beforehand is imperative.
And having it all cloud stored as well is a big deal because, sometimes it was on their computer that burned down in the fire. Now they can't get to it.
Right.
So it's a big deal. All right, that's two good ones. Give me one third one to wrap us up with today.
I would say the third one is don't wait to get help. The longer a claim goes on, it's not like fine wine. It doesn't get better.
Yeah.
So just don't wait to get help. If you've prepared and you've checked your policy and you've provided, all the documentation, right, and you've had and you've given the insurance company everything they need, don't wait to reach out and get help from somebody.
Man, I couldn't agree with you more on that one. I mean, we know people who have waited, and by the time they're ready to really start getting aggressive with the claim, the insurance company's gone bankrupt, they left the market, and now the Guarantee Association for the state, whether it's Florida, North Carolina, Louisiana, California, whatever, they're now stepped in. And when they step in, it makes it really hard to get a fair claim on behalf of a homeowner. So that's great advice, man. Well, look, I want to thank you for breaking this down with us. These changes are big, and most homeowners don't even realize that the rules of the game have shifted. So some great advice you've given them. For all of our listeners, take this advice from Michael Giardina from the Godbey Giardina law firm very, very seriously. Review your policy, document everything. Don't waste time when it's time to do it. And look, download Risk Ready so you're not caught off guard when these things happen. Michael, tell our listeners what's the best way for them to get in touch with you if they need legal representation with their claim.
Yeah, so you can go to Godbey Giardina Law Group. Our website is g-glawgroup.com, or you can call us at 985-590-3555.
And listen, Michael and his team are ready to help. He's got offices in several states. They handle claims, across half the country. And they're true experts, and definitely someone that we endorse and recommend. So I want to remind you one last time, if you haven't done so, download Risk Ready, get yourself in order, be ready for whatever life throws your way. You've been listening to the Risk Ready Roundup. Special thanks to our guest, attorney Michael Giardina. I'm your host, Jason Doyle. Get, be, and stay ready for whatever life throws your way. We will see you next time.